Today, I've brought something really exciting for you. When I stumbled upon this, my whole life changed. My literal hope is that you will keep coming back to this video to put into practice what we are going to talk about. Let's get into it. Today, we're going to talk about inner witness, also known as the observer self. In my previous videos, we touched upon how children develop. Children are emotional sponges from a very young age. When a child is born, they need to be mirrored appropriately in order to develop a solid sense of self. When children are born in loving, emotionally available, warm and accepting and witnessing environments, they can develop a solid sense of self. However, otherwise, they can feel quite lost. Healthy parents do not project on their children. When a child is born to a healthy parent, they would observe the child, witness the child with a non-judgmental and a curious gaze. However, when a child is born in an unhealthy environment, or parents who have a dysregulated nervous system or have existing traumas, etc., they project their dreams, issues, desires, goals, troubles onto the children. In many cultures, this is rampant, that before even a child is born, their profession, their responsibility, their characteristics even are pre-decided. In those households, children can be expected to support unconditionally, or children can be expected to take on responsibilities of caregiving or caretaking. When you mix this intense projection with emotional neglect and sometimes physical violence, this can leave children feeling profoundly and terrifically traumatized, even if there is no physical sign of abuse. Just imagine, as a child, feeling a storm of uncanny emotional sensations in your body and even some thoughts as the child grows up, without having any resource or understanding as to what is happening with you, what to do with these emotions, how to deal with them, or if the storm will ever pass. I am pretty sure majority of the adults who are watching this video would be profoundly used to this, even as in being an adult. Children regulate themselves externally. And you can see this when a child cries, they need their parent. When a child is laughing, they would look at their parents for reactions such as, is my joy okay? Am I doing anything wrong? Or am I being too loud, etc.? When a child is hungry, they look at their parents for cues. Parents are responsible for providing external emotional and psychological anchors to children till the time children develop the capacity to having that anchor within themselves as a part of normal childhood development. Many cultures, and I believe this is very rampant globally, tell men to be emotionless creatures. And I mean it in a crass form. That is compared with a state of being stoic. However, Stoicism is not emotional suppression or repression. Emotions are then categorized as vulnerabilities by those adults. A vulnerability is an inherent weakness or a spot where you've been traumatized before and you can get hurt again. Emotions, in their most honest form, are not vulnerability. Emotions are physical and somatic sensations. Emotions are information packages. They're trying to tell you something. When your emotional body as a child is abandoned by you, what do I mean by that? When emotions themselves are made an enemy in a child's psyche unconsciously, they reject their emotional body. Consciously speaking, from a spiritual point of view, we have different types of bodies that are sort of overlaid on top of our physical body. All of them are not physical in nature. They are energetic bodies. Because everything is spirit, our physical body is in the spiritual body as well. You can understand it as your physical body, your astral body, which is also your emotional body in some cultures, your mental body, which is your psychological body, your etheric body, which is also your causal body, and then on top you have your energetic body. All of these bodies in combination are within your biofield. So imagine what happens to you if you someday decide that you don't want your hands. You will be limited in the way you live life. The same principle can be applied to with respect to your emotions. When you live life entirely cut off from your emotions, you do not cease to feel them. You feel them, but you numb yourself when you suppress them or distract yourself to escape them, because as children, you were never told what they meant, if they were safe, how to categorize them, how to work with them, what their information was, and that emotions is a storm that sometimes arises and sometimes can go away. So what happens if, as a child, you were never witnessed, emotions were never okay, and you grew up as an adult? You tend to use the same mechanisms that you used as a child in order to cope with your emotions. So you would look at externally at people for cues, body language. You would read in between the lines when they tell you something or even compliment you. You would hyper-focus and assess your wins and achievements or become extremely critical. When this is stacked on top with a lot of experience, lived experience in your life, you tend to lose touch with yourself if you've never had a sense of self to begin with. What that does is that actually leaves you feeling like an imposter in your own life, because internally you tend to lack sort of like an inventory of your lived experiences, which are approved and validated, which are non-judgmentally commented upon. Your internal narratives are missing as well, so you're profoundly confused about what you should have done, what you not should have done, what should have happened or not. Also, your emotional reactions, that is your emotional truth, is entirely missing. Life is inherently stressful for all of us. So when we go through ups and downs of life, when emotions happen, if we are not in touch with our own sense of self, if we do not have an inner witness or an observation self, we tend to externalize that function, and we tend to unconsciously start looking for somebody who is regulated, at least in that moment, to deal with our emotions, to echo it back to us, to validate it for us, etc. You may ask, what's wrong with it? We can always find people who mean us well, right? So we can go to people and gather data about us or validate us. It is okay as long as you are surrounded by loving, non-judgmental people who have a stable, regulated nervous system, especially at the time when you need them, and especially if they have your best interest in mind. Let's be honest. How many of us do know how many of these people in our immediate entourage? If you are lucky to have these kinds of people with you who have your best interest at heart and want to help you and validate you all the time and echo your sense of self back to you and approve of you, count yourself really lucky. However, sometimes we are surrounded by people who either do not have a regulated nervous system or do not have our best interest at heart. In those situations, it is almost dangerous to rely on those people to echo our sense of self back to us, because they can be riddled with their own projections, their own issues, and their own trauma when they validate us or explain our emotions to us or approve of us. For example, sometimes your entourage can tell you that you're doing something absolutely right, while the objective truth might be that you're not. They could also tell you that what you're feeling is what you're supposed to feel in that moment. However, objectively, it could be that you must be feeling something else, or you should be feeling something else. How do we deal with this? When we lack inner witness or observer self within us, we tend to become very fixated, sort of like addicted to external validation. For example, if somebody compliments you, In that moment, you feel seen, profoundly validated, and your felt sense of being is that you automatically feel like you are that person. For example, if somebody calls you beautiful, in that moment, you will enter into the lived experience of believing and having a conviction that you are beautiful. But when that moment passes, the hunger returns. And so you feel entirely insecure when you are not validated again. When this is done in loops, you can tend to become very devoid of self because you do not have an internal narrative, a continuation of lived experience. And like I said, you could feel like a fraud in your own life or a ghost in your own life. And this can leave you feeling entirely confused because you do not know what's wrong or what right that you should be doing in order to finally become that person and stop feeling this insecurity within you. So for example, let's say if somebody else shines brighter, in that moment, because of comparison, if you are not instantly validated by someone else with the same kind of compliment or with the same kind of being seen, you can feel extremely envious of that person. And that person doesn't even have to do anything to make you envious of them. We tend to rationalize this experience within us in way of our ego. And usually these kinds of experiences happen very quickly. So you do not really consciously register what's happening with you. And also on top of it, you do not even understand your emotions. So it can really happen on an autopilot. But look at the irony of it. You are a person who inherently has that strength. You are looking at somebody who also has that strength. But in that moment, you do not feel or are convinced that you have that strength as well. It is quite sad that you do not have that self-definition within you. You do not need to be exact wavelength or exact magnitude of the same kind of strength as the other person has. It's just that you need to have a continued lived experience, a narrative, a sense of self, a knowing within you of what and who you are. So what's profoundly sad is that you could be an apple tree looking at a peach tree where children are trying to eat the fruit, and you inside could feel like you're a rotten old trunk with no fruit. Another situation that can arise from this is that you can identify somebody having more strengths or unconsciously better than yourself, and you can pedestalize them. However, at the same time, feeling envious towards them. But they can become your sort of supply if that person also has an edge and they have a way about them where they themselves validate you. When you lose that person, or if you lose that person, you can feel a condition where you might feel like you are ceasing to exist, as if you're literally disappearing in thin air if they do not recognize you or do not acknowledge you or do not pay any attention towards you. This can mimic the narcissistic supply dynamic. However, it's not true for everyone, and this is not a diagnosis. A lack of inner witness and observer self can also leave you feeling very sensitive to rejection. There are times when you can feel rejected. However, there are times when you look out to not to feel rejected. When you lack a sense of self or an inner witness or the observer self, which basically observes non-judgmentally your lived experience in a continued basis with unconditional positive love, we're going to talk about it towards the end of the video, then what happens is that you can supposedly feel like you are just floating through life, that your life has no meaning. And inherently, you can feel very sad because you can constantly compare yourself with other people and you would always find yourself short of something. There are times when you might even find yourself feeling like you're less of a human being even. This is profoundly true for children who have not only felt trauma in their childhood or experienced trauma in their childhood, but they have been even instrumentalized or parentified or objectified, or were used as emotional incestuous dynamics or as emotional spouses in the lieu of a physical present spouse in the family, or if they were caretakers, which basically falls under the parentification dynamic as well. So when you are that sensitive to rejection because of the lack of inner witness or observer self, you can become hypervigilant on any cue that you can find in order to avoid feeling rejected. So for example, if somebody puts a boundary or if somebody communicates a preference, you would not feel like that person as a human being has an inherent right to decide something about their own life. However, if it relates to you, you would feel like they're rejecting something about you. Some people with a history of emotional neglect or this kind of trauma where they have not developed or do not have an inner witness or an observer self can tend to make God or higher power or source or their ancestors, etc., as an external witness to them. So in some cases, they can have immense amounts of faith in an external source of power. Having an inner witness can resemble metacognition. Metacognition is an advanced state of consciousness where you are able to think about how you think. Meditation can immensely help you in achieving a state of having an inner witness or an observer self, because after you get into a practice of meditating daily, there comes a point when you become adept with trying to empty yourself of the chaotic thought forms as well as the incoming downloads of information. So when your mind is peaceful and you achieve a state where you are able to focus in between thoughts, you can then become calm and develop this place where your consciousness can go and can help you witness your experiences from a pragmatic point of view. However, if meditation is not your cup of tea, I've got you a shortcut. Some of us have been lucky enough to be held by someone who is warm, unconditional, accepting, and non-judgmental towards ourselves. If you know that feeling or felt sense of being or sensation, remember that experience and try to lean into it as much as you can and breathe into it so that you can sort of dwell into it or dive into it. However, if you do not have such an experience, what you can do is decide right now and from right now that you will give yourself a radical, non-apologetic, non-judgmental, unconditional, pure, positive focus and presence, regardless of whatever you do or whatever happens in your life. This looks profoundly simple. However, I assure you, the most complicated and fruitful things in your life are always simple and easy. This is world away from your inner critic who judges your experiences, tries to avoid your emotions and the information that they present to you, and who you have inherited as a part of your upbringing. And as soon as you make that choice, something happens inside you. Your consciousness adapts. There is a new dimension which opens up within you where your awareness can go and sit and witness the experience of being you for the first time. It's obviously a practice, just like any other practice. You have to be disciplined and committed to do this over and over again until it becomes your unconscious mechanism. In my opinion, I find it easier to commit to meditation just for this specific reason. In the journey of life, at the very least, you have to be on your side. This is not to excuse any bad behavior or to say that we want to become delusional or to say that we want to keep approving ourselves and keep ignoring as to what needs to change in our life. This is just so that you can have a lived experience with yourself. Notice I mentioned having a non-apologetic, non-judgmental, unconditional, absolute, pure, positive focus and presence towards you, your lived experience and your emotions. That is you encouraging and becoming your own inner witness or observer self. Until you do that, you do not stand a chance to have a wider perspective about what should have or could have been done in a certain situation, or what your emotions actually mean. Once you can observe a lived experience through the eyes of your own radical, non-apologetic, unconditional, non-judgmental sense of self, you can then develop this freedom and perspective and profound alignment to actually view a situation from different angles. You would then be able to even view the situation from many perspectives. In positive circumstances, you will eventually develop a continued lived inventory of your experiences, what your emotional reactions are, how you deal with things, and this will then over time aid you in having a solid sense of self. You would know more about yourself down the line, and it would make sure that whatever you know is actually your truth, not just a subjective truth, but as much as possible, your objective, all-rounded truth. So for example, if somebody compliments you, your inner witness will take that compliment, will register it, let you simmer in it, and then that compliment would take a root in you and bring fruits for you. In not so good situations, you will be able to non-judgmentally sit through your emotions and sort through them, as well as not stuck into the habit of rumination or overthinking or self-judgment or guilt and blame, and don't go into this dark place where you cannot seem to come out of yourself. It would also help you to have a pragmatic point of view of a situation, and then because it's non-judgmental and because you can accept that has happened, it would bring you to a place organically where you would be able to decide the next course of action from a profoundly conscious point of perspective. Life is a dance of closeness and distance, longing and fear, rhythm and misstep. Sometimes we step on each other's toes, trying to learn the music of being human. Other times we trip on ourselves. But if you ever so much allow yourself to stop standing at the edge of it and move with it, I promise you that life will become better with every moment.